Hello my beautiful planty friends, and welcome to my YouTube channel. If we don't know each other, I'm Pita and I'm the owner of Pita's Planters, a rare plant shop located in Dallas, Texas, and I'm also in the process of getting my PhD in neuroscience. I have been wanting to start this YouTube channel for a very long time now because there's so much that I want to share with all of you. As a plant shop owner, I've had the opportunity to care for hundreds and hundreds of plants, and I've also killed my fair share of them. So I hope to be able to share everything that I've learned with you with a little bit of science background. In this first video, I'm going to address one of the most common questions that I get in the shop from customers, and that is, what in the world is semi-hydro? What is PON? And how in the world do I grow in it? Is it even worth trying to grow in it? So first things first, what in the world is semi-hydro? Semi-hydro refers to the idea of growing plants in an inorganic material such as leca, perlite, or PON, and relying on capillary action to be able to deliver the water to the roots of the plants. Typically, the setup is kind of like this, where there's a water reservoir at the bottom of the pot that contains nutrients, and that water is delivered to the roots of the plants over time. There are many great reasons to grow in semi-hydro, and some of my favorite are: one, because it's really low maintenance. Once you get the whole setup going, you get into a nice little routine, then all you really have to worry about is making sure to keep tabs on the level of water in the reservoir and just make sure that it doesn't dry out for too long or that it never truly dries out. Some people like to have dry periods in between. For me, I always make sure that there is at least some water in there to make sure that there's always humidity in the roots, but I think it really depends on the plant and on your preferences. Reason number two is because there's less likelihood for root rot, and the reason for that is because you'll notice that most of the materials that are used to grow in semi-hydro are chunkier compared to soil, and usually it's some sort of volcanic rock or something like leca, and naturally, because they're chunkier, they create more air pockets around the roots. This is great because the roots need oxygen to thrive and to prevent root rot. So as you can see here, I don't know if you can see it really well, but there's a lot of nice little air pockets in there, creating a great aerated environment for the roots. Reason number three is because it's reusable. Since the mediums that are used to grow in semi-hydro are usually inorganic, this means that they will not break down over time, so you can use them time and time again. The main thing I do recommend though, if you are going to do that, is make sure to sterilize it in between uses. You want to make sure that anything that might be going on with this plant, maybe there's some sort of algae growth or bacteria, is not carried over from one plant to the other. So there are two main ways that you can sterilize it. One is by boiling it, or just getting it to a really high temperature and washing it really well. And the second way is by cleaning it really well with hot water and then spraying it down with 70% alcohol. Another great reason is because naturally there's going to be a lot more humidity around the roots, so this makes it a great environment for thirstier plants. And the last reason is somewhat debatable. I think that growing in semi-hydro can help prevent some pests such as fungus gnats, but honestly guys, where there are plants, there will be pests. It's just nature. So all in all, you might probably not avoid like spider mites, mealybugs, but I do know that fungus gnats do not like this environment, so more than likely they won't go and lay their eggs in here. As I mentioned previously, the goal of growing in semi-hydro is to use an inorganic material to grow your plants. So one really popular one is leca. I've seen some people do it in like perlite, fluval stratum. I'll talk about that one later. But the most common one by far is PON. PON is made up of three main ingredients, and they're basically all rocks. So one is red lava rock, pumice, and zeolite. And you'll notice that now there are a lot of different brands of PON out there, but the most well-known brand and the original brand is Lechuza PON. And Lechuza PON has a fourth ingredient in it, and that is slow-release fertilizer that can last for up to about 6 months. The fourth ingredient in Lechuza PON is actually really important because since you are using rocks that are inorganic, the rocks themselves don't contain contain any nutrients. So anytime that you are growing in semi-hydro and using an inorganic material, you will need to add nutrients to the plant to make sure that they are thriving and getting all the nutrients that they need. You'll notice that most other brands of PON don't come with added fertilizer, and this can actually be a great thing. I prefer it that way. I prefer to add my own fertilizer, so I know exactly what dilution I'm using, how much is being delivered, and when. You will also notice that not all PON is created equal. Lechuza PON tends to be really fine and a lot smaller. You can find PON that's a lot chunkier. The one that we carry in our store, we have two different types. One of it is a bit chunkier compared to Lechuza PON, and I also have my Alocasia semihydro mix, which is basically PON with some added perlite as well, and you'll notice that that mix is a lot finer. So I think all PON is great and can serve different purposes. Typically, I like to use smaller PON for plants that have finer roots. So for instance, Hoyas, Alocasia, or any small plant that is just starting to develop, I highly recommend using finer PON because the finer PON has fewer air pockets, and so it does preserve the level of humidity a lot more in those plants. Chunkier PON is great for plants that have bigger roots or more mature plants. And so I would normally do like monsteras and thuriums that tend to have big chunky roots. I find that they do amazing in chunkier PON. But again, this is my experience, so I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. And honestly, at the end of the day, it's all about trial and error. Try it out, see what works for you, what size PON you prefer. You might stick to just one, and that's perfectly fine. I've seen some people growing really small allocation chunkier PON, and it does great sometimes. So this is the science of it. Just try it out and see what works for you. All right, so now that you're familiar with semi-hydro and PON, I'm gonna move on to talk about some essential items that I think you should have to start your semi-hydro journey. So the first thing you'll need is the growing medium. As I mentioned previously, some people like to do it in Leica, some people like to do it in PON. Lechuza PON is a bit harder to get in the US, but some stores do carry it. We carry it in the shop, but we unfortunately cannot get it shipped out because they're really heavy bags and shipping costs an arm and a leg. Look at your local stores, local shops. A lot of people are coming out with their own PON mixes, and they're really great. As long as they have the three main ingredients, you are solid. You can also try your hand at making your own PON mix. The three main ingredients again are zeolite, pumice, and lava rock. I highly recommend looking for about a 1/4 inch size for each of the ingredients. That's a bit finer and closer to the size of the Lechuza PON. The next thing you'll need are self-watering pots. There are so many different sizes, styles, varieties, but the main thing I recommend when getting a self-watering pot is to try to find something with a clear inner pot. That way you can see how the roots are doing, how they're acclimating, and honestly, it's just really fun to see the roots growing over time. And that way you can also see when it's time to repot. I recommend clear pots for growing in soil as well. Clear pots are honestly just a game changer. When using PON and growing in semi-hydro, you can do it in a few different ways. So the first way that I mentioned, of course, is with a self-watering pot. And so that is your typical setup that you're familiar with, where there's a inner pot, an outer pot that has no drainage, and the inner pot usually has some sort of wick like this that falls into the water reservoir, and then the plant is potted in here. We carry these self-watering pots in the shop. I love this one. I love to have a clear inner and outer pot so I can see the level of the water, but just a warning with this, sometimes when you have clear pots, it does increase algae growth. In my opinion, it's just more of a cosmetic issue. It doesn't actually damage the roots, but again, it's up to you. If you don't like to see algae growth in there, then I recommend getting a darker outer pot and a clear inner pot. When you are growing a lot of plants in semi-hydro though, it can quickly get expensive to buy a lot of different fancy self-watering pots. So there are a few that I recommend, and this is my favorite cheap way of doing it. So what I do is, this is just like a clear solo cup that you can buy in bulk on Amazon. And then this is, I believe, a 3-inch planter. And then I just buy the wick. You can buy the wick in bulk on Amazon as well. And you can buy clear pots. And what I do is, look, this one fits perfectly. I was so proud of this one. It's a perfect fit. So you can just buy that and make your own. It's also super, super cheap. I've done it with some 4-inch planters as well. But you can kind of play around with different containers. See, as long as you're able to fit a clear pot inside of something else that has no drainage and there's some space at the bottom, boom, you have a self-watering pot made. And what I can do is also link these specific things. That way you can make these yourself. The second method that I've seen being used often is to grow in a clear container, whether it's glass, plastic, acrylic, whatever you'd like, and planting directly into it. So if you choose to go this route, make sure that the bottom half of the container is filled with your medium of choice, whether that's PON or Leca, up to you, but make sure that there's a nice layer of that at the bottom, and then you plant your plant on top of that. So the goal is to have the roots up here and a nice layer of your medium, so that when you water, you don't fill the water level all the way to the top. You want to keep it below the roots line to avoid root rot, especially at the beginning. Eventually, the plant is going to start developing new roots, and they tend to be different types of roots. So they're more water roots than soil roots, and so they're more adapted for having higher levels of humidity around it. So eventually you will notice that those roots are going to make it down into the bottom layer of the pond, and this is normal. The roots are hydrotropic, which means that they are attracted to higher levels of humidity, and that's fine. These roots will be able to handle being down here where there's higher levels of humidity, but once you do see that they start circling around the bottom, that's when you know it's time to repot. And the third method is kind of like an in-between between these two first methods that I mentioned. So there's no wicking, and there's direct contact with the pot and the pond and the water reservoir. So the way that this works, you'll notice there's different types of self-watering planters where the pond or your medium goes directly into the water, and the pond itself is what's going to wick up the water into the roots. So this is another kind of like DIY planter that I like to use because it's a lot cheaper. So this is just, again, a clear plastic cup that I was able to buy in bulk on Amazon. And this is just a nice little 4-inch clear pot. And so in this case, I don't use a wicking string in there. What I do is just, I sit this inside of this pot, and you'll notice that the root line is a bit higher, so the roots aren't down here just yet. So I sit it in here, and when I water it, I put the water level up to around here so that the pond is just lightly touching the water. And so naturally that water is going to be wicked up into the roots as needed. And here I never fill it up to the top though. You always want to make sure that the water level is below the root line. Again, over time, some roots are going to make it down into the water, and those roots are going to be able to survive in there because they're new roots that are closer to water roots rather than soil roots. So those will be able to be okay. But if you just replanted this, make sure that the water line is down here. You don't want to flood a brand new planted or repotted plant into pond because that will cause root rot. All right, so now that we've covered self-watering pots, we're going to move on to the next essential thing that you need to start your semi-hydro journey, and that is some sort of fertilizer. Remember, you are going to be growing in an inorganic material, so there's going to be no nutrients in there. Even with Lechuza PON that comes with some slow release fertilizer, that only lasts maybe about 6 months, sometimes even less. So you want to make sure to invest in a good fertilizer for your plants. My fertilizer of choice is this guy right here. This is GT Foliage, not sponsored, but open to sponsorships. But yes, GT Foliage Focus is my go-to for watering my plants in soil as well as my plants in semi-hydro. And you'll notice most fertilizers come with instructions on the dilution rates depending on what you're going to be using it for. So here you can see the dilution rates for semi-hydro. And over time, you'll get a better sense of how much to add to your water jugs. You might not even need to measure after a long while. So at first, do measure it to make sure that you're not over fertilizing your plants, because more fertilizer is not always better, you guys. If you add too much of it, it can cause fertilizer burn. So be careful with that. Especially if you get Lechuza PON, I don't recommend fertilizing your plants with an additional fertilizer right away. There's enough fertilizer in there, so be aware of that and use the right dilutions. And my rule of thumb for fertilizing my plants in semi-hydro is just to add fertilizer when I see that there's active growth. I do grow them in a controlled environment in here, so it's always nice and warm and they're getting lots of bright light, so that doesn't really change throughout the year, so they're actively growing. So I basically add fertilizer with every single watering. All right, so the next two things I'm going to mention that I would say are not essentials, but people might disagree, but I still want you to be aware of it and see if it might work for you and if you want to invest in it. So the next thing is some sort of pH meter. Don't get scared, stay with me. I know when I mention pH, people freak out, and even I do too, honestly. I'm in a love-hate relationship with chemistry, and pH is one of those things that I'm just like, ugh, do we really need to do it? Well, I think it's worth doing it at first, but my usual approach is if things are working fine, your plants are doing great, they're thriving, don't worry about the pH strips. But if you do see that there's a problem that's arising, then you're gonna have to start going down the list of things that might be going on with your plants. And so then you would go through, is it the pests? Is it this? Is it the pH in the water? So it's really up to you. You can test it at the beginning when you first start growing in semi-hydro, or you can just do it when a problem arises and see if maybe the pH of the water might be causing the issue. pH is very important at the beginning because plants like to be in a sweet spot between, I believe, 5.5 and 6.5 pH range. And if it's too high or too low, that can actually affect how the nutrients are taken up by the plant. So some nutrients are not bioavailable if the pH is too high or too low, which basically means that you may be adding as many nutrients through the fertilizer as possible, but your plant might not even be taking it up if the pH is too high or too low. So this can lead to deficiencies of certain nutrients. So to avoid that, you want to make sure that you test the pH. When it comes to semi-hydro, there are a lot of different things that could impact the pH levels. So one, if you're using hard water, like tap water, there are some salts and fluoride and other things that can impact the pH of the water. And the other thing is your fertilizers themselves sometimes might be changing the pH. So again, you can test it at the beginning just to see how things are working if you want to. The cheap way to do it is to use pH strips. So these, again, you can buy on Amazon, and they're basically like a little strip that you would dip into your water. And what I would recommend is don't pH the water that you're using to water your plants, pH the pass-through water. So if you're passing this water through there, I would dip the strip into the water in here, because this is going to be more accurate and tell you more about the environment in here. So if you do decide to do that, get some pH strips, dip it in there, and usually there's going to be a color change and there's going to be a little guide that tells you what color means what pH. So it's actually really easy if you want to try it out, but again, up to you and how you want to do that. And the last thing goes kind of hand in hand with the pH, and that is filtered water. A lot of people that grow in semi-hydro opt for filtered or distilled water, and for many great reasons, because the water that comes out of our tap is hard water, so it contains a lot of extra stuff that you might not want to build up in your semi-hydro container. So if you choose to go with some sort of filtered water, that's great. If you have access to that, if you're able to do it. If you choose to go with tap water, the thing I do recommend is to flush it out after maybe about once a month or so. And what I mean by that is that because there's hard water, there's going to be deposits of salt and other things in your medium. So sometimes you'll see some like white buildup in here. What you need to do is about once a month, take this out and flush it. Just run it entirely with water to try to wash out those salts. Same with this, clean your container, because at the end of the day, this down here is stagnant water. So you want to make sure to clean this out really well so there's no growth of weird bacteria or anything in there. All right, and last but not least, what plants should you put in semi-hydro? Honestly, any plant can thrive in semi-hydro. If you can grow a plant in soil, you can grow it in semi-hydro. But before you go transplanting every single plant into semi-hydro, I would say prioritize a few. So any plant that likes higher levels of humidity in their roots are gonna do amazing in semi-hydro. So normally you'll hear me mentioning alocasia. For those of you that hate alocasia, kill alocasia, have given up on alocasia, try semi-hydro. I am able to keep so many of my rare beauties alive because I grow them in semi-hydro and they don't always do well in soil. So alocasia are one of those big ones that definitely would benefit from semi-hydro. Another one would be anthuriums. So anthuriums do tend to like a bit more humidity in their soil and they seem to do incredible in semi-hydro. Hoyas are other finer root plants that can benefit from semi-hydro. Calatheas. They'll probably do amazing in semi-hydro. Those are drama queens. And you will notice that sometimes some plants might take the shock from switching from soil to semi-hydro a bit harsher than other plants. So do not be disappointed by that. Just because one plant reacts poorly, it doesn't mean that all plants will. So in my next video, I will do a step-by-step guide on how I transplant my plants from soil to semi-hydro to make sure that you don't repeat the same mistakes that I made at first. So thank you so much for being here, you guys. I am so happy to be doing this. Please leave a comment or share. Help this channel grow so I can keep creating more awesome content for you. And let me know in the comment section. I would love to hear if you've been growing in semi-hydro for a long time. If there's anything I missed, help each other out in there. We're all here to learn. I am by no means an expert. I've just made a lot of mistakes while growing plants. So I'm trying to share all of that, everything that I've learned with you. Thank you so much again and tune in for the next video. Mwah, love you all so much and come by the shop if you're local. We'd love to see you.